Leroy and Kim Wagner lived in the same house, but they couldn't be further apart. Their marriage turned sour, but neither one believed in divorce, so they just decided to call it quits and remain under the same roof.
The bell was ringing for the first day of school, and she comes sweeping through the door in all of her glory, and I couldn't help but notice her. There was just a life about her, just exuded joy, exuded confidence, exuded beauty.
It was love at first sight when Leroy met Kim at Bible college. He fell in love with her joyful enthusiasm, and she fell in love with his quiet strength. Soon, they were engaged.
I really went into marriage thinking this was just going to be a great 50-year date. I just thought, oh wow, now we get to be together all the time and it's just going to be so fun.
But the fun ended 3 days into their honeymoon. After a long drive to the mountains, Kim settled in for a night of romance.
And he falls asleep on me. I mean, we had barely hit the bed and he falls asleep.
I was awakened by her cries. I didn't really think that was that big a deal, so I thought, she'll get over that.
I'm like shocked, like, why doesn't that devastate you that I'm letting you know how you hurt me?
That pattern continued through the early years of their marriage. When expectations were met with disappointment, Kim would express strong emotion, and Leroy would dismiss her or withdraw. What first attracted them to each other was now driving a wedge between them.
I loved Leroy, but at the same time, I could be so repulsed by him.
I was raised to not be emotional.
I could be so upset with him and disappointed.
And so instead of having the tools to handle that, I would just shut down.
I kept wanting him to just, stand up and be a man.
It made me feel like that I could never measure up. It brought out what I'd always feared, and that was not being able to do what I knew that I should do as a man.
I just saw being a helper to Leroy as helping him do things in a better way.
And so the further that I would retreat into sullenness or passivity or into a cave, the more intense that she would become.
Kim gave birth to a daughter, but 5 years into their marriage, they reached a breaking point.
I still remember the intersection where we were sitting in the car when he looked over at me, and I had been pressuring him, but he looked over and he just admitted,
evidently, I've not been able to love you like I should. You've made that perfectly clear. I don't know how to do that, and so I guess I don't love you.
I was devastated, and yet I wasn't that surprised.
As Christians, Leroy and Kim didn't believe in divorce. Their son was born a few years later, but then they lived as roommates for the next 8 years while raising their children. Kim could no longer endure the pain and went away to a cabin to read the Bible and pray about her marriage.
And God used scriptures to take me on a journey of revisiting my life and convicting me where I'd harmed Leroy, where I'd been intimidating, cruel even at times. And I began writing out just instance after instance that God brought to mind.
Kim then asked Leroy to join her at the cabin.
And then when she called me, wanted to share with me what the Lord had spoken to her about, I was so dead emotionally. I didn't really have any response at all.
That was okay, because God had done such a deep work in me. I wasn't obeying God in how I treated my husband to get my husband to treat me a certain way. I was focused on loving him more than I was getting love from Leroy.
Kim had changed, but their marriage stayed the same. 2 years after Kim's time away, Leroy went on a retreat of his own to ask God to examine his heart.
And God very strongly dealt with me and took me back to the earliest moments of my memory as a boy, that fear had been in control of my life. I was afraid of not fulfilling my responsibilities. I was afraid of failing those who looked to me. And so this had greatly impacted my marriage relationship with Kimberly. And I apologized to her, and I said, so much of my interaction with you and so much of my hurt and pain has not been because of the way you've been. It's been because of where I have been long before I met you. And that began our walk together as broken, humbled, repentant, but hopeful that God was at work in our marriage, and begin that process of restoration.
Leroy and Kim began living as husband and wife again. That was in 1999, and today their marriage is stronger than ever. Together they counsel other couples with the hope they've been given by the God of second chances.
He's restored our marriage. It is a happy marriage. It's a blessed marriage. It's a fun marriage. When I look back and I see what I would have missed had I checked out, had I have divorced, I shudder to think of all of the blessings, of all that God had in store if I would have walked away, if I would have stopped short of enduring and persevering and trusting Him.
My husband is my best friend. He's who I would want to hang out with more than anyone else. I admire him and I adore him. I could have never imagined how good it could be.
The God of restoration and a second chance. Well, joining us for more on this topic is Emerson Eggerichs. He's the author behind the best-selling relationship book, Love and Respect. And he's a communications expert who's been sought out by pro sports teams, members of Congress, even the Navy SEALs. And we welcome you to the program today.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you so much. No, I'm delighted.
Wow, so much to pull out of that story.
Oh, yes.
But there was a line in there where I think it was the wife who said, expectations were met with disappointment. If you could have entered their relationship at that moment, what would you have said to them?
Well, I think there are many things. One, I rejoice how this has turned out.
Yes.
But I have seen so many people get into this, what I call the crazy cycle, and I'll explain that in a moment. They're good-willed people. There isn't ill will, but there's this honest misunderstanding. Jesus said in Matthew 19:4, have you not read, he who made them from the beginning made them male and female? And I say neither are wrong, just different. For instance, the University of Washington studied 2,000 couples for 20 years, and they discovered that 85% of those who withdraw and stonewall during a marital conflict is the husband. So what Leroy did is what most men do. During a heated moment, their heartbeats get to 99 beats per minute, and so they have to calm themselves down and exit and withdraw. That's what men do with each other. That's an honorable thing to do. But the descriptor in the research said that's an act of hostility to a woman. So it raises the question, is it an act of hostility or is it an act of honor? It just depends on whether you look at it through pink or blue. Yeah. And on the other side, women would criticize and complain, and men felt that ongoing criticism was contempt. Like Leroy said, I didn't measure up. He deadened. I must not love you because you've told me I don't love you. So he begins to feel disrespected, but we know that she's doing it out of care, deep love and care. So is it an act of care or is it an act of contempt? And what happens is couples get on what I call the crazy cycle based on Ephesians 5:33, where God commands the husband to love and the wife to respect. Yeah. And that second part is controversial, but what I discovered is a correlation. Without love, a wife tends to react in a way that feels disrespectful to her husband. And when a husband feels disrespected, he tends to react in a way that feels unloving to his wife. She's not trying to be disrespectful. She's crying out, love me. He's not trying to be unloving. He's saying, I don't feel you respect who I am. I know you love me, but I don't think you like me. So they get on this spinning crazy cycle. Without love, she reacts without respect. Without respect, he reacts without love. And then confusion sets in. And the expectation in her heart is, as you pointed out, I just want you to love me. But she delivers the message in a way that she said, I was repulsed by him. And men begin to feel, I know you love me, but you don't like me. And so he loses energy. And then he stonewalls. And no woman can imagine doing that. No woman can imagine not connecting and talking. So when he withdraws, it can only mean one thing. He doesn't love me. Yeah. And so now you have two good-willed people living on the crazy cycle, totally confused and not knowing where to go from there.
Can I ask you, how many men do you think feel what Leroy felt? That, you know, in examining his life, going back to his childhood, this fear that he could never measure up or be enough was in him long before he ever met his wife.
Well, that's a male issue. Shawnee Feldhahn did research, asked 400 American males, would you rather be left alone and unloved in the world or be viewed as inadequate and disrespected by everyone? Secular group. almost 75% of the men said they'd rather be left alone and unloved in the world.
Wow.
When a man hears the message, I find you inadequate and I don't respect you, he will shut down on that. And then he tries to figure out, why am I shutting down on that? Is it a family of origin issue? It can be, but it's a masculine issue. And so when men go back, why am I doing this? And he went back to try to figure out why he was the way he was. And I say to men, this is who God made you to be. Now the question is your wife really trying to say to you she doesn't respect you and find you inadequate, or is she really saying, I feel unloved and alone? So we have to decode what the true message is, and we challenge men not to personalize that, though every man feels that way.
I find it so interesting that in Scripture, thousands of years ago, they nailed it with husbands, love your wives. You would think the alternative to that, or not the alternative, but the other side of that would be, and wives, love your husbands.
Exactly.
But it says respect your husbands.
That's right. No wife is commanded to agape love her husband in the Greek language, that unconditional love. Only husbands are commanded. And I point out, and my wife was Sarah, we've been married 44 years, Sarah has a nurturing nature, and God's not going to command her to do what he designed her to do. But in the relationship, I'm under divine imperative to love Sarah because I love less naturally than she does. And of course, then she's going to feel unloved. But she has a tendency then, when she feels unloved, to react in this negative way that feels disrespectful to me. And the Lord says to her and to every wife, make sure your demeanor is one of respect. It doesn't mean you're respecting his bad behavior. You respectfully confront the bad behavior. Many women think we're asking women to give license to their husbands. No. When you're upset, the University of Washington found a woman's eyes darken, her face turns sour, hand on the hip, scolding finger to the side, rolling the eyes. And when estrogen kicks in, the word choice of contempt just rolls off her lips like it's just there. It's within her nature to be disrespectful when she feels unloved. And it's within his nature to appear unloving when he feels disrespected.
Thus the cycle.
There it is.
Let's go to number 2, the energizing cycle.
Well, you are familiar with that. To get off that crazy cycle, then I have to come to grips with, how do I love Sarah? What does it mean for God to command me to be loving? And the energizing cycle says his love motivates her respect, and her respect motivates his love. And Kim, whether she would have said, I was going to put on respect, she said at the end, I admired him, I adored him. She made a decision to realize, you know what, I loved him, but I wasn't coming across in a way that I would say felt respectful to her husband. And she made a decision. She gave him a gift of what we call unconditional respect, or it's an unconditional positive regard toward the spirit of the man while you're confronting things that hurt you.
Yeah.
And this is the same thing with unconditional love. You lovingly confront things that hurt you as a man. You don't have to be harsh and angry. No woman will respond to that.
So the holy grail of perfection, as you call it, is not what we should be shooting for in a marriage. It doesn't even really exist. So what do we shoot for?
Well, the Christ follower, ultimately, I am called upon to love Sarah unto Jesus Christ. And Christ stands beyond the shoulder of my wife. Yeah. And ultimately, I'm to love Christ. It isn't about Sarah. And I didn't know how this would play in Peoria among evangelicals, but they get it. And same thing, Christ stands beyond my shoulder, and Sarah's called upon to reverence Christ, and her reverence for Christ should spill over on to me as respect for me. But each of us has to come to a point where we trust that the Lord wouldn't command me to do something that didn't ultimately work. I don't know of one woman who will not respond to a husband who humbly loves her or even says, I'm sorry for being unloving. You don't have to be perfect. Sarah melts when I authentically and humbly say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me for being unloving? And when she says, I'm sorry for coming across in a disrespectful way, she's entered what we call the honor code, and I soften.
And we communicate.
That's exactly right, because now we are speaking each other's mother tongue. The
Yes.
key to communication is mutual understanding. And if I speak perfect German, you speak perfect Spanish, we can be poetic in our prose,
but
I
in
don't.
Trouble.
Exactly. But when I understand your love language and you understand my respect language and use of vocabulary words, like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful toward you. I'm upset with you. I'm mad. How do I say this in a way that you don't think I'm trying to diss you? Almost every man will look and move toward.
Yeah. I'm not going to tell him what the 3rd cycle is. You got to get the book. That's just the bottom. It's called Love and Respect. If you need more relationship advice, you need to get this book. It's available nationwide. Such wise counsel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry.
Great to have you here.